All right, now we're going to talk about formative assessment. This is the content from chapter 12 in your course textbook. Okay, so let's talk about some of the basics. When we talk about formative assessment, what are we talking about? Number one, we would say it's a planned process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but emphasis on that word planned and then process. Both of those words are important. It's the evidence of student status given through assessment. You might say, that sounds like back when we started the class, that's really we talked about the evidence that determines a student's status, okay? You're right. This is going to look just a little bit different than that. For instance, we're not talking about report card grades, test grades, even really quiz grades. Okay, the bottom line is also something very important about formative assessment. It's used by teachers and students. Okay, so really a big emphasis here on students and teachers both using the information from formative assessment. Okay, we make a difference in our language here. It's assessment for learning, not assessment of learning, okay? So assessment for learning helps you learn the content. Assessment of learning lets us know if you learned it or not, okay? So when we talk about formative assessment, we're talking about assessment for learning. Now, learning progressions, they're what your author terms the guiding framework for formative assessment. So it's almost, if you will, like if you can picture it like a graphic organizer, it's the steps, it's the building blocks, okay? So when you write a learning progression, one of the first things that you have to do is you have to know your curricular aims. Now, again, that's something that you're like, okay, we keep saying that, seems so obvious. I'm telling you, it can be easy to teach a lesson and not really know what your objective is. So you're so focused on the content that you want to deliver. Maybe you're focused on the activities that your students will do, the video that you'll show, the game that they'll play, the quiz that you'll give. And you carry all that out without really knowing the central purpose that all of those things are supposed to support. Okay, that's your curricular aim. So we want to make sure that we know what that curricular aim is. Okay, we also want to identify the building blocks. Okay, so now especially the way your author talks about formative assessment, he suggests that you use it for bigger projects, like let's say writing a term paper, or maybe a science fair project, something like that. Okay, and so you don't start with that big curricular aim that my students will be able to complete a science fair project. They will be able, do a science investigation. Okay, you start out with all of the things. First of all, they're going to have to know how to choose a good topic. They're going to have to be able to find information. They're going to be able to write a hypothesis. What are all the building blocks that are necessary? Okay, that's the next part about it. What skills do the students need to get in order to reach the aim? Okay, now your author does caution that if you use too many steps, assessment will be difficult. So he suggests that you select them carefully, use like large grain size steps, okay? Then you sequence the building blocks, okay? I know where I'm going, and I know the steps that I'm going to have to take to get there. What's the best order to do these things? And your text author suggests that you should be flexible here, because you might find out as you're going that you need to rearrange, or maybe you just need to be reflective. And next year you think, I'm going to teach these skills in a different order next year. Okay. Then you plan your assessments. So, um, what assessments are you going to put in place to see if each building block has been mastered? Okay. Now, also just a reminder that you have to be able to collect evidence of mastery. And if you can't think of a way to assess it, you might need to rethink your building block. We could go back to the idea of a term paper. Maybe you're writing for English, or maybe this is a research paper for your social studies class. Well, choosing a topic obviously is something you're going to have to help your students with. Maybe you have to teach them how to write a thesis statement, or how to write an outline for a paper, how to identify valid sources, how to support their thesis with details. Those are the, what are the building blocks? Think about, and I think, okay, I'm the social studies teacher, I'm not the English teacher, right? But one thing you find out is that, reading and writing are really taught by all teachers. And of course, you want to support the English teacher, right? So hopefully, maybe it might even just be reviewing. But there will be certain things too that will be key, like to your social studies class, or, whatever course you're teaching. Okay. What are those building blocks? What skills? Maybe it's even making a table of contents, and putting them in the right order, and then how are you going to assess them along the way? So maybe you want them to make a content outline. Well, what are you going to do to make sure that the content outline is happening and it's being done correctly? That might even just be a personal interview with the students, that they bring on one day they bring their outline, and you discuss it with them, and they tell you how the paper is going to work. Okay. That's the idea of a learning progression. The 4 levels of formative assessment. This is where I think you kind of get a bigger understanding about what formative assessment is and how it works. The first level, and this would be the lowest level, okay, is teachers' instructional adjustments. So I'm going to put some checks in place to find out if my students are mastering the building blocks or the stepping stones to get to the final goal. And if they're not, if I can see, wow, these students don't really know what a thesis is, or they don't know how to find a topic or whatever, okay, I'm going to have to make some adjustments there. The second level is when students adjust how they're learning. So students might say, I should stop trying to complete assignments when I don't understand the directions. I need to ask a few questions. Or I should read those directions more carefully. Or I should make sure I know what those words mean. Or I need to take notes in class, because when I get home, I can't remember. Okay. Whatever it is, maybe there was like a in-class quiz that was used as formative assessment, and they realize, I think I don't listen very carefully, because I thought I knew what I was talking about, but I missed all of those questions. Or so remember, step 1, teachers buy into it. Teachers get feedback from how students are learning and adjust their instruction. A next level, a higher level, a more desired level, is when students also buy in. And maybe they took that in-class quiz, and they know that it's not being recorded for a grade, but they take it seriously because they know it's going to give them feedback about how they're learning and if they need to adjust what they're doing. Same thing, take it to the project level. So students, they take the feedback that you give them on their hypothesis for the science fair, or Maybe if they're writing a research paper on the sources that they've chosen or the outline for the paper, and they take that feedback seriously, they come prepared, they have their hypothesis written, or they have their outline completed, so they can have a good conversation with the teacher in the interview about it so that they can move forward successfully. What is what does the opposite of that look like? They know that they're not going to miss any points if they don't have that outline ready, so they don't do it. Well, that is not they're not going to get any good feedback, okay? So it's desirable when both teachers and students use the feedback from formative assessment to adjust what they're doing. What's really great is if you get your whole classroom buying into this system. So everybody in your class is working together. They have the intermediate steps completed and on time, ready to get feedback because they know it's going to help them learn. They want to do their homework, for instance, okay? Because they know that even though maybe that homework isn't being recorded for a grade, they know it's going to tell them if they're understanding the content or not. And then, of course, the fourth level is if your whole school operates on this system. Um, that's, that's obviously going to have the most impact, the most value. Let's make sure we understand what formative assessment isn't, okay? It's not an off-the-cuff alteration. Not saying you should never make off-the-cuff alterations, because sometimes you're, working on a project in class and you can just sense nobody's with me. I lost everybody. You can just look at their eyes, okay? And those of you who teach elementary, you're going to see students, they don't fake you, okay? You know what they're thinking and if they're with you and if they understand, and they love to participate. Not so easy when you're at the college level, okay? Even high school is not quite as easy. So we're not saying that if you can tell that, everybody's confused or lost, that you shouldn't fix that, okay? We're not saying that. We're saying that's not formative assessment, okay? I'm going to go back to I believe it was our first slide, that formative assessment is a planned process, okay? So making changes based on how students are answering your questions or the looks on their faces, not what we're talking about, okay? There are also some formal tests. Think about like standardized type tests, okay? And because formative assessment is such a popular term, they have kind of adopted that. Not what we're talking about. It's totally different use of the word, okay? I will also just go back to that idea of off-the-cuff alterations. It's not asking this question. Okay, does everybody understand? 14 hands go up. I don't think I was very effective, okay? That's not really a planned process. And a lot of times students won't admit to not understanding. Who wants to be the first one to say, I don't get this, right? So you're probably not going to get a good response from that. Also, if you say, okay, well, I won't do that, but I'm going to talk about something, and then I'm going to throw some questions out to my students and give them opportunity to respond, and I'll use that as my formative assessment. We would say no, okay? And I'll tell you why. Because in general, you get feedback from a very small number of students, okay? Your sample is way too small, okay? So a better thing to do is to teach your content and then have some kind of I had a professor once who called them formative checks. And what did he mean? You had some kind of response, or you required some kind of response from students before you went on. And when I say a response from students, I mean from the entire class. So that might be a thumbs up, it might be a thumbs down. That's kind of a low level one. If you have clickers in your class, okay, with the electronic board where they have clickers to press, that's kind of awesome. Even playing a game like Kahoot, sometimes you can find out like what percentage of students, but again, you're engaging every student, at the same time. Um, if you do younger grades, a lot of times do something like whiteboards where they write their answer on a whiteboard and everybody holds it up. An exit slip could be something like that. Okay, it's something that you have planned, not just general questions as you're teaching, or does everybody understand looking at their faces. It's not an off the cuff kind of thing. When do you use it? Your author believes it should be used for really challenging learning outcomes. For instance, science fair projects, research papers, etc. Okay. Others call for it to be used more often. I would say my takeaway for you is I would like you to be on the bottom line. Others call for it to be used more often. Okay. Even I like to think of how we use our daily lesson plans as a good time to use formative assessment. So you write an objective and assessment for every lesson that you teach. Okay. What is your objective for this specific lesson? How are you going to know if students met that objective? A lot of times what they'll do on a daily basis, you are not going to collect that work and put it in a grade book. It's practice work. It might, excuse me, be as simple as a formative assessment. I'm sorry, as an exit slip. It might be holding up answers on a whiteboard. It might be a quick true false quiz that you give. One very simple formative assessment that you can do is if you have just give students a sheet of notebook paper, and they take that notebook paper and they fold it in half lengthwise, and they number it. If you're going to give a 10-question quiz, they number each side of their paper 1 to 10. You ask the first question, they write it on their paper, and you continue through the rest of the quiz, and then you give the answers. And they write the answers on the right-hand side of the paper, similar really to how you do your homework assignments. Okay, and you allow them to grade their work. They will have on that paper, you will be able to see what they wrote, and then you will also be able to see the correct answer if it matches or not. The student will also have a record of that. So it might be something like where you collect the quiz and look at it for your own information, and then you give it back to them and say, now remember, look at these questions, look at what you wrote down, look at what the actual answer is. That, okay, that's good information for you, what you still need to study. Okay, personally, I think that's the value of formative assessment, especially at the undergraduate level, where you use it on a daily teaching basis, so students know right along if they're being successful. Of course, I would also recommend that you use it for more challenging projects as well. What does the research say? Well, the two people who are credited with the most research, the most famous research, the strongest research regarding formative assessment are Black and William. And by the way, that's not a misspelling of William's name, that he spells his last name with just one L. Okay, I would challenge you. I own a book that they helped to write, and it's a really great book on formative assessment. If you really want to get into this, they're the ones that you need to study. And it doesn't have to mean that it's like real technical reading. The book that I have has really practical ideas in it. Anyway, their study is kind of like the landmark research on it. It's conducted in 1998. What they showed was that a careful use of formative assessment has robust results. What did they mean by using that word robust? It's almost guaranteed to work. If you follow all the steps, if you take it seriously, if you use it as a planned process, it is almost guaranteed to work. Okay, so that begs the question, right? Why isn't everybody doing it? Well, a couple of explanations, perhaps. Lack of understanding. They really do not know what formative assessment is and how it works. And some of that may be because, we mentioned like some people call certain tests formative assessments, and you know what I mean? Just like people use that word to mean different things, okay? It might just be a real almost superficial understanding of formative assessment, where you think, oh, that's just the practice, but not really understanding like how it needs to be planned and how all of the students need to participate and that kind of thing, okay? There's really no excuse for this, but honestly, it's probably a very true factor that it's just hard to change. If you're not used to teaching that way, it's hard to change, okay? Again, not a good excuse. All right. Then, external accountability does not recognize improved achievement. What do we mean by that? Really, this is kind of looking forward to the idea about standardized tests. That when you take these, we spend so much time on making sure we have that, what is kind of deemed as like essential content, and to make sure students score well on the test. And or even, you know, what goes on the report card grades, right? This doesn't go there. And it does take time. It really does. And so, because it's not going to show up on the report card grade necessarily, or it's not going to be a question on the standardized test, maybe it doesn't get done. I will tell you one thing I've done. I've done this a lot, especially like in my Foundations of Education class for formative assessment, because that's a really content heavy class. So I will just, I will make questions, learning activities, just real short. Okay, that's the other thing you have to remember. Formative assessment doesn't have to be long. It's not like a 2-page test. It might be a 3-question quiz. Okay, but incorporating those slides right into my PowerPoint so that I can't just skip over it. Remember, it's a planned process. And what happens if you don't have it embedded into your lesson is that because you know, school takes a lot of time, and teaching, you get into your lesson, it's like, oh, I really got to cover the rest of this content, so I'm not going to stop and check students' progress. Okay, that's part of the problem. Okay, so I stopped, like, I started embedding it in different lessons that I teach to make sure that I actually do it. What you find out is that students actually do better, they learn more. So why, again, it may not show up as a grade on the report card, the final product is going to be better, okay? Or the final test grade hopefully is going to be better, especially if students buy in, not just teachers, but students, okay, buy in. So it really is going to show up as the final as the final product, okay? So that's an explanation to, hopefully that complements what you read about in chapter 12 and maybe helps you understand it even just a little bit more.